All right, I got to give it a few seconds because I know the stream sometimes cuts the beginning. So this is like the pre-show. All right. Welcome, guys. Welcome, viewers. Welcome, listeners, to Religion Zero, number 19. I am Brook Potter, of course. I'm a little off-center on this camera, so let me just shake a little bit here. In this week's episode, we're going to be touching on the concept of Breaking Bad leadership. We're all pretty much familiar with the controversy that just recently came out with Jerry Falwell Jr. And his expose with the pool boy and all these different types of things.
Quite spicy.
Quite spicy, indeed. I don't know. Do you know the details of it? I don't really know too much about it. I understand that he likes to watch. That's kind of
that's the gist of what I heard. Apparently more has come out, but I have not looked at it specifically. But yeah, and they said this has been going on for a while, like years and years. This wasn't just a one-time thing that he got caught in. It was a regular meeting.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't know too much about Falwell. I know that was Liberty University in the United States. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know if he was formerly like a pastor,
right.
Like we think of traditional terms. He's a lot more like Pat Robertson, from 700 Club.
700 Club.
Where he's in general a conservative Christian that has political power and influence, and you know what I mean? He's just a regular Christian elite that wasn't a pastor. It's kind of weird.
Right. Well, he's a pastor's kid. So Jerry Falwell is his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And this is and I think Falwell passed away a couple of years ago. And his son obviously has taken over the reins. And this accusation, and we have to say, we don't get sued by the powers that be. This accusation has come out.
Allegedly.
Alleged sexual impropriety. Not so much on his part, apparently on the part of the pool boy and his wife, right? So, and for those who are not on the inside track of that, the story goes that the married couple, have involved this younger pool boy in their relationship, to which Mr. Falwell Jr. seems to approve in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And this is the event that has basically left shockwaves throughout Christendom, or at least in the evangelical West. So we're going to touch on that. But before we get into that, Corey, man, what's going on with you, and how is the house move going?
Oh, it's interesting. I'm officially moved in.
Congratulations.
But I still don't own furniture that much yet. I personally sleep on the floor from my back issues in the past. I think we've talked about them here off and on, but yeah, I actually sleep on the floor. But my house, since it's still pretty fresh and it was unoccupied for a couple months, there is hella spiders and bugs everywhere. I've sprayed it down. I've done everything I can from my own, consumer side. So I don't know if extermination guy coming in is on the menu, but it might be because the
getting there.
Yeah, the Walmart stuff isn't working out. So
fair enough. And you're sleeping on the floor, so at some point, floor sleep and spiders might collide. And
those are two bullet points I don't want to mix, but I'm mentally preparing for it. Right?
It's kind of inevitable. Excellent. I mean, just a briefly update for me. I'm completely moved in. You and I were having the conversation beforehand that people are now wanting to come and visit. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake, please don't visit. I'm totally living the bachelor life. I've got like one chair, like my dining table has one chair. I've got like one plate, and one pair of knife and fork. Like everything is just for me. If anybody came over, it's, as you said, standing room only. There's like no room for anything else.
Oh yeah, I definitely one up to you on that because I definitely have 3 plates and 3 forks and 3 knives. So what up, man?
It was a set. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, but that's mostly because I don't want to do dishes every day. I'll do it every other day, every 3 days, maybe.
I'm being a bit hyperbolic. I mean, I do have other pots, pans, glasses, and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm basically running on the minimalist type of approach. All of my friends are like, yeah, let's come and visit and stuff. And I tell them just about 4 buildings away from me is a bed and breakfast. Stay your ass there. You can go there, and if you want to see me, you can walk across in the morning, knock on my door, and I'll let you in. But I don't want people in my place.
Yeah, I'm actually just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the big Chiefs and Royals sports stadiums. And next to those is a litter of hotels for people to come watch the games. So, you guys can go there. There's no games happening. So
Exactly. And
they would love your business. They would.
While we have Heather in the chat, just let me know how I'm sounding. Corey was telling me that my mic was a bit off, and I've made some adjustments. So let me know if I'm coming in too loud, too soft, too bassy, or anything like that. I'd appreciate some feedback on the stream. So, my friend, we are one man down. I assume he is sleeping. I don't know what he's doing. But Amos may be joining us. But in light of the scandal that has come out over the Falwell Jr. Incident this week, I thought this week we can kind of discuss that this is not limited, firstly, to the Western evangelical movement. He would be considered evangelical, I assume. And this is inherent in pretty much a lot of these types of religious institutions. And you were telling me that yesterday you were having this conversation with some people rather close to you that went on for 2 hours. You want to fill us in a little bit on your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So when we were preparing for this, I think we picked this topic like Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe.
Yeah.
And right when the news was starting to break about this Falwell stuff. And so from there, I was just kind of pondering the philosophical ideas of how these things happen, because this clearly isn't the first time we've had a scandal in, mainstream Christianity or figureheads or things like that. The one that sticks out the most to me in the past that it's also happened is Ted Haggard.
Yes.
You remember Ted Haggard?
He was caught with a male prostitute more than once, apparently.
Yeah, with meth. Yeah,
with meth. Oh, he's not a body.
Yeah, and he was very big on and he was in a Colorado Springs megachurch.
Right, very anti-gay, anti-gay marriage, that kind of preaching from the pulpit.
Yeah, and so I don't think he was officially employed by Focus on the Family, which is the big Colorado Springs conservative Christian company, right? And they're also really politically active, but he was involved enough that he was speaking for them and stuff like that. And he used to talk a lot about against gay marriage politically, but then he gets caught with a gay prostitute and meth, and so he was the poster boy of anti-gay conservative that turned out to be gay, right? And so, but our family lived in Colorado for 12 years, so we didn't actually go to his church. He lived an hour and a half away from us. It was too far, but everybody knew his name. You know what I mean? Right. And so it was a really big deal at the time that everybody was talking about, oh my God, what's happening? And so to me, that's kind of the poster child of megachurch pastor falling hard that did have mainstream attention, And so to me, the Falwell thing kind of just goes right into that, right? Whether you think it's more or less extreme, I guess, is up to personal taste, but yeah, it just kind of crazy. So I brought that up talking to some of my family members the other day, oh, you guys remember Ted Haggard and now this Falwell stuff? Where do you guys think that comes from? Yeah. And we talked for over 2 hours. It was very entertaining. At least for me. I don't know if they liked it, but
they probably zoned out after the first hour.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, I totally get that. In fact, I think you and I will get into this. I know of a pastor. His name is Jonathan Welton, Dr. Jonathan Welton. He's more in line with the Bethel kind of new charismatic movements and stuff like that. I know him personally. I mean, we're not exactly chummy, but every time he came to Trinidad, he'd reach out to me. We'll go out and stuff like that. And he wrote a book called In the Eyes of Honor or something like that. It's a 200-page plus book about sexual purity. And needless to say, he runs, he ran an academy, some kind of, not a certified, but one of these kind of, theological schools for the young people like Bethel and these other things. And it turned out that he was manipulating and kind of being a sexual predator in this environment. And that news came out, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago and stuff like that. But I remember the Ted Haggard at the same time. And I realized, and you could tell me if you agree with this, whatever these types of ministers in these positions of power tend to push against the hardest tends to be a reflection of their own internal struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to be, like, for me, that's always a warning sign. When I see some preacher, pastor, even politician, it doesn't have to be just in that sense. Like, they really hate the gays, or they really hate, whatever the case, drugs or whatever. That's projection of their own internal struggle. I don't know if you'd share that sentiment. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would say that does happen a lot with people in general. And then it just gets more and more obvious, like the higher up the totem pole you are, right? Correct. Because you have way more eyes on you, and you have way more cameras, and your life is looked way more in depth. So those things usually get exposed. But there's also this part where there's also more pressure to keep that image, right?
Correct.
And so, because when I think about like famous pastors doing crazy things, like really famous people in general, it's not even just pastors, do crazy ass things, right?
Yeah.
Everybody.
And it's, as you say, it's not only crazy. I mean, we have, not to rag on the Catholics. The Catholics are going through a sexual scandal right now, within the parish, a lot of these parishes. The Coptic Church, I think in Serbia right now, there's horrendous things that they've done to the refugees and the children of refugees that have come in. This is the Coptic Orthodox Church. I mean, they're not even in the spotlight. I mean, the West doesn't even acknowledge these people. So it's not limited, as you quite rightly say, to fame or popularity, but those eyes on an individual, that's a lot of pressure. And they tend to try to repress this behavior even more. But as we both know, it's like squeezing a balloon on one end. It's gonna find expression somewhere else. So
exactly, yeah. And so, but when you're talking about like how'd you put it? You're hating the things that you actually do.
Yes.
I think that is very hilarious, honestly, but also, I mean, I think it's kind of true of a lot of people, especially when you have an image to uphold and you care about your image.
Correct.
And I think what's interesting, though, is when you add that power and fame dynamic into it, the power dynamic of being in the higher totem pole and having an image you have to keep. If you look at Ted Haggard before he got famous, he was actually like trying really hard to do the right thing. And he like grew his church super organically. You know what I mean? He wasn't like born in elite and just made a mega church out of thin air. Like he started in his basement and worked his way up with like 12 people in his church, right? Living at, working out of his own house. So, I mean, like his earlier life was actually like seemed like a really genuine pastor, really trying to do the right thing. But as it grows and grows, I think that is the interesting point, is when, the weird shit starts happening. Because having 12 friends at your house doing a Bible study church, versus having to stand in front of a bunch of public cameras and to your 15,000 person church. And it's also getting nationally televised half the time to have 3 million grandmas on their couch watching you too, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting how that changes a person over time, or at least changes their attitude of how they see themselves in the work they're doing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know if it's pressure. I don't know if it's that, that Epstein Pizzagate stuff where like, oh, when you're the upper echelons, now you have to be, you have to like swear your soul to Satan to be famous and eat kids and stuff. Hey, maybe it's that. Who knows? I haven't been that high up. So.
Oh man, this stream is gonna get killed on YouTube any minute now. But no, I completely agree that especially for want of a better word, the church for the most part, the Western Evangelical Church, which is the primary televised kind of online. Hey, we got Tom
America's favorite church, right?
Yeah, basically Americana. I mean, we have it in the UK, but not nearly as much. But that the whole evangelical mega church pastor stuff and have hung their hat on the morality totem pole, for want of a better word. So they've gone out of their way not to express the life of Christ in the believer and trust the Christ in people. They've hung it on, I am not behaving like everyone else. And if that's your shtick, if you're just the morality police and stuff like that, you create this environment, exactly what you're describing, where as the leader of said ministry or whatever, you have to lead by example. That means you've got to be like basically morally perfect in all of these areas. And even if you're struggling in something, you can never say it. Mm-hmm. And that is the downfall, right? I think, what's the verse? I think it's the book of James, chapter 5, verse 16, confess your sins one to another that you can be healed. Mm-hmm. The church is supposed to be the healing ground for the people who are struggling.
Yeah.
Right? We're supposed to
But the pastor feels like they don't have that option, right?
Correct. Yeah. And it's a making of their own devices, right? They created this environment of holiness that if anybody were to come up and actually walk into the church and be like, bro, I'm like struggling with porn. I took a hit of meth last night or whatever the case is. Everybody's going to look at that person like, you're the devil. Like, you're not one of us. And what they end up doing is they wear a mask. They basically say, I'm fine, right? They're dying on the inside.
Yeah. It's almost that transition from, this is my passion, I want to lead a church, I want to help people. And then there's a transition slowly into, this is my job, right?
Correct.
Because you got to put on a face for most jobs if you're an employee, right? You got to put on a face, and even employers occasionally too. Like if you're in board meetings or need to make something up. Yes. I think the most obvious one is thinking about, like, if you've ever been a waiter or been in the service food industry, you got to put on a smile and pretend you're happy all the time, even
Customer's always right.
Even though you have to cuss all of them out under your breath when you go in the back room, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so they get that energy of, oh, I have to do my job and perform everything correctly for these customers. And so, like, once you start seeing your church as customers instead of people you're trying to shepherd, yes. I think that opens the door for so many things to go wrong.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. People wouldn't know this, but back in Trinidad and Tobago, one of the early churches that I was visiting, I was never really fully a part, but I would visit it quite regularly. The guy, by far, accomplished great things. He's built this massive mega church in Trinidad. I mean, mega in Trinidad is like 1,000 people, so it's not ridiculous like some of the stadiums and other things like that. But basically, he brought Pentecostalism and charismatic evangelicalism to Trinidad and the Caribbean. This was the guy. I think he's on his 5th wife at this point, right? I think he is.
Pass him around,
Yes, but again, he's micromanaging the lives of all of these other people. So again, it's that kind of, this control and stuff like that. So I'm not entirely surprised some of these women left. Obviously, that same behavior he's putting out, trying to control the moral, lives of all of his leadership or whatever the case might be, is no doubt what's going on in his relationships, which is probably why a lot of these women don't stay with him. So yeah, that's part of the dynamic of what we've seen. Do you remember, what was this guy? Jimmy Swaggart? Do you remember the story of Jimmy Swaggart?
The name sounds familiar, but you might need to remind me of his sins.
Well, he was also, that was back in the 80s and stuff like that, so you might be too young for that. 1988, Jimmy Swaggart was implicated in a sex scandal with a prostitute. He was caught once. And then, of course, he was denounced and, all the good stuff, and they put him into like the rehabilitation and whatever. And then I think let me see, do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. But I think 3 years later, he was caught again with a female prostitute. And at the time, he was one of the biggest tele-evangelists back in the 80s. He was like one of the first, doing prophecy and television healings and all that good stuff. And he basically got called. I think he was kicked out of the Assemblies of God. Mm-hmm. He's still going. He's still got his ministry going and stuff. Obviously downsized tremendously, but
yeah, it's interesting how many of these guys go through all these scandals and they get super televised and everybody hates them. But like 2 or 3 years later, they got a new church and they got a new ministry going strong again, right?
I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, right? Yeah. Because that is the grace of the church. What's going on, Amos? Welcome to. Thanks for joining us. Just let me finish that point and then I'll let you jump in, bro. That's the church is about restoration of broken people, right? That is part of the redemptive message of Christianity. Maybe you shouldn't be in leadership, but yeah, you do want to see a person restored if they do have a genuine gift of teaching and stuff like that. You shouldn't just toss them out.
Yeah.
But I do agree that sometimes the pass is too hard, and you blink 3 weeks and it's like nothing happened. I think that's a little foolish as well.
Yeah, but I mean, like, technically, if this is Old Testament, we're supposed to stone them, right?
Yeah,
You don't really get second chances when you get a bunch of rocks thrown at your head.
well, thank God we're not living under the Old Testament, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Welcome, Amos. I'm glad that you could wake up and finally join us 20 minutes late. How you doing, bro?
Shame.
Yeah,
Shame. Shun the unbeliever.
definitely getting stoned after this. Doing quite well, all right. Yeah, funny we're speaking about leadership, and here I am. Morning.
Traipsing in 20 minutes late to the office.
The biggest scandal of Religion Zero history, Amos seems in again.
And it's not the first time he's done it.
We've all done it. Come on now.
So just give people a little brief about how your week has been. Just kind of fill us in, and then let us know if your thoughts on the Jerry Falwell Jr. scandal that broke this week.
Right. That
of
thing.
Which you know nothing.
Just smile and nod. Smile and nod. It works.
No notes. Amos strikes again.
Had a pretty good week. Not too much going on, of course. I think as many other people are having go on, lots of nothing really going on. It's just kind of watching from the sidelines as the rest of the world devolves into chaos now. Please do tell. What is this falling from grace that we're talking about?
So the topic this week is, based off the Jerry Falwell Jr. Allegations. We have to say allegations, otherwise we'll have some legal issues. This is the son of Jerry Falwell Sr., founder of Liberty University. I believe he was a pastor, televangelist, all these other good things. So it was revealed in an allegation that him and his wife like to involve a pool boy in their sexual relationships, of which Jerry Falwell likes to watch his wife engage with said pool boy. And this is not
cooking.
Yeah, basically. I was trying to be polite. Alleged cucking. Yes, that is the allegation. Apparently, it's been going on for quite some time. From what I understand, some new information came out. I really didn't follow it, but that was the inspiration for this week's topic, which was basically what happens when leaders go bad, why leaders go bad, and we're going to speculate on that in a minute. And with that, we also touched on. Corey was who was the gentleman you were talking about, Corey, in Colorado?
Oh, Ted Haggard.
Ted Haggard, who was caught with a male prostitute and meth.
You mean Jimmy Swaggart?
No, Jimmy Swaggart was caught with a female prostitute and coke.
Hey, yeah, that's tame.
That was the 80s, man. They didn't have meth in the 80s. But I was talking about Jonathan Welton and his allegations about what happened in his school where he was kind of predatory. Yeah. So we were making the point that a lot of these preachers who push hard against these moral issues, whether it's pornography, sexual addiction, homosexuality, whatever the case might be, tends to be a reflection or a projection of their own internal struggles. And we were about to get into the idea of why that is based on the structure of the church and the pressure of being a televangelist and all these eyes on you. And you jumped in around the point where I was saying, well, yeah, we've made the church into this we've hung our hat on morality in the church instead of the life of Christ in us. So we're playing in the morality park, and that puts a lot of pressure on believers and the leadership to look morally upstanding instead of being honest about their struggles. Instead of doing, James 5, I think it's 5:16, confessing your sins one to another for edification. So that's a quick recap. Amos, give us your thoughts.
So in order to combat this issue within the church, I recommend everyone watch porn. Everyone. No, I'm just kidding.
We're all complicit.
We're all complicit. God's grace is so abounding that it doesn't matter anyways. At least that's how people tend to think. Us who are more speaking the way
graces.
The greasy graces, the slippery slope. What was it?
We'll get to solutions eventually, but I mean, do you remember any scandals? Do you remember any church scandals? I know lots of them, but have you had any personal experience?
Personal experience. Now I know you and I never really encountered any scandals that we were directly involved with the person, like working with the person. At least,
sure.
Were you and I both? I mean, you probably have had some experiences working with people.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything go on, but not me personally, but I'm just thinking on there were definitely some like instances of maybe like something was maybe going on, like I'd heard maybe some, not everything is always what it seems with certain preachers. They preach a certain way, they talk about a certain thing that they're very much against or something, and they're totally not doing that. Like
Yes.
now that I look back on for example, you're on the carnivore diet, you eat very much just meat, and that's you've seen results with that, you're able to maintain under that, and there's a preacher that you and I know
show off the pizza box that's sitting behind me.
right, but you and I know of a preacher that is very much all about just eating meat.
Yes.
And it was very interesting to realize, when I got to know this person in person, the small bit that I got to see, that it wasn't all that.
Yeah.
Or, just a lot of different ways you can look at it. We're just not everything is exactly as presented. These people that like talk about, I'm a man of God and I have, I have authority within my own house. And then you meet their wife.
And it's like, this guy has no authority.
Yeah. He has all the authority outside the house.
Right.
Or at least so you think. And that's true. I mean, I've also just seen that as being true across the board too. Like any sort of business venture between men and women, where the man is kind of seen as the leader, when in reality the woman is taking charge of most things. But that's a bit separate from the whole thing. Yeah,
so you're basically saying the duplicitous nature.
The duplicitous nature that.
Yeah.
Where I understand. Well, yeah. I mean, like, I understand. Meeting minister's wife is a black pill a lot of times. Yes, Tom.
I have stories.
Yeah. I never quite understood even like just the duplicitous nature that people were at least open to. Like, many times that ministers would say, I would give all this up if my wife told me to.
Right. Fair enough.
I've heard ministers say that many times, because the whole family comes first kind of idea. And then these are men that could, men of God, as we would call them, that could have huge potential to do great things and reach more and more people. But they'll fully admit that if their wife told them tomorrow to give it all up, they would. And I'm like, right.
Well, I mean, we could touch on. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. Corey, what do you think? Mission first or family first?
To me, that's a little tricky, because I think again it goes back into a little bit of what we were talking about before. Like, is your mission like your your will from God, or is it your job?
Right.
Like, I think will from God should be above your family, but your job should not, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I guess it's kind of the way you put it. If you're literally just getting paid to do ministry stuff, I would say no. But I mean, at the end of the day, if it's like you feel like you're really doing God's will and you're called to do this, and you got to put God's mission above your own and everyone else's. It's supposed to look like you hate your family in relation to how much you're following God.
Right.
Like it says in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's a tricky proposition, because I've seen the reverse, of course, where men have put the ministry above their family, and of course that's been a train wreck unto itself. And I mean, one of the founding, I guess, precepts of being a leader in the church is that you have your home life kind of sorted out, right? You can't run the church if you don't run the house, kind of thing.
Yeah, Paul had a lot of qualifications to be an elder in the church, right?
Correct.
And some of them were, essentially getting your house in order, to paraphrase.
Exactly. So yeah, I agree. It's tricky because there's nuance and stuff like that. And again, when people are that willing, I think if you're not willing to have the struggle of it, you're not being true to yourself in that respect. If it's just like, if it's God's will, I'm going to sacrifice my family on the altar of God's will, I think that's unhealthy. And at the same time, like, if, as Amos was saying, if my wife says I've got to give this up, I'm going to give it up that easily, that's also unhealthy. It kind of, if it's that easy for you to give up, that's not really your calling then. That's kind of the thinking. Yeah. So Amos has just run off. He left us a private message there. He'll be back in a few minutes. But yeah, so where were we on the conversation? We were just getting into the story of Jimmy Swaggart. And you were saying you don't really know much about his story. Who was another one that I was familiar with? You know Billy Graham, right? Billy Graham, of course.
Yeah, the guy. He's
the
like
guy.
He was apparently quoted as like the one that got my dad and my uncles and my whole dad's side of the family to be Christians, because they weren't before.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, and they went to one of his big revivals or big conferences in Kansas City. So,
I mean, there's no doubt the man was, he was definitely born to be an evangelist. Do you know anything about his grandson, Tullion?
No, I don't.
It doesn't carry the Graham name. So this is the grandson to Billy Graham. I can't pronounce his name. It's what is it? Hold on. Tullion. I wouldn't even begin to try and pronounce his last name. But he is a Presbyterian minister down in Florida, and he was actually very much along the lines of a New Covenant grace teacher, where he understood a lot of what's the guy that you listen to, the Christian anarchist guy? What's his name?
Oh, Sean McCraney.
Sean McCraney. He's very in line with that, and a couple of the guys that I listen to, like a guy called John Crowder. Even Tom Bombadil talks about a guy out here in Cardiff. He's very much in line with that New Covenant understanding, union with God sort of thing. He got busted having an affair with another woman in his church. And well, he's a good-looking guy. He's kind of looking, tall, dark, and handsome. He's got like a chiseled jaw and all this kind of stuff. And what was surprising to me is because there's a lot of division over the message of grace in the church. Everybody attacked his ministry, his teachings. Even to this day, like even for myself, I would consider myself a grace preacher, New Covenant teacher. If I make any mistakes and stuff like that, the church that I was affiliated with always comes back and be like, it's because, he preaches the forgiveness of sins and all this other nonsense.
How could you preach the forgiveness of sins?
I know. It's like,
that's completely made up. There's nothing in the Bible about that.
Christianity 101 I'm being crucified for, right? But what always surprises me with people with this attack is that they never take into account how many people that even don't share this doctrine that fall into the problems that we're discussing. Mm-hmm. So Jimmy Swaggart was one. He's not a grace preacher. Falwell was one. Who's another one? Well, Jonathan Welton was, but the Catholic Church obviously has their problems. And we were just saying the Coptic Church also has their problems. This is a human issue. This has nothing to do with doctrine, you know?
Congratulations, you're not God.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? You passed the test of being a sinful human like everyone else.
Like, for God's sake, man, you know? But it shows the myopathy of the competition within the church, where, you know, it's become a business and everybody's trying to poach, you know, clients, which is basically patrons, from every other church. So they're attacking each other in this kind of ridiculous way. You know, again, adding to that pressure where your leadership has to be perfect, which is impossible. You know,
I mean, just look at me. I'm not a perfect leader.
There we go.
We forgive
time
you.
to jump in. I was just talking about the story of Tullion, which was Billy Graham's grandson.
Right.
Who is a grace preacher, and he got caught having an affair, I guess with one of his congruents or whatever. And everybody attacked the doctrine. Everybody says, oh, it's because he's this greasy grace preacher and this new covenant teacher. And, you know, there's another guy he's going after, Joseph Prince, a lot. I mean, Joseph Prince hasn't fucked up, but there are a lot of people like, as far as we know. And everybody's like, oh, they're just waiting for it because of this greasy grace message and whatever. As if it's limited to this one area of theology, right? It's like there's messed up stuff all over the church.
Yeah, there's that weird spectrum of theology, sort of on the. It's almost like the political compass. You've got like the authoritarian, you've got the libertarian side, and all this such, and you know what? Like all corners, all corners of the doctrines have their own problems. You know, you get in your grace preacher's got problems, your hellfire preacher's got problems, your, you know, responsibility, your moral. Like this church that I used to go to that's here in Minnesota has definitely had its fair share of problems. And now the senior pastor there, I've never heard of any sort of scandal or anything, but there's always been like individuals within their pastoral staff that I've heard just kind of get shuffled around, moved around, you know, get sent on impromptu mission trips and such when something happens, just to kind of like let things cool off. You know, higher up pastors sleeping with lower down pastors' wives, you know, flip-flopping, switching and such, and then it gets out, and then, you know, families are ripped apart, and then one of them gets sent away while the other kind of like picks up the pieces, kind of thing. And this was a church that was kind of very split. So like the you know, the higher end, like the senior pastor was very much he was the word of faith kind of stuff, and then but then like there was this real strong sort of moral side of it. It wasn't like, you know, your typical like, you know, hellfire fundamentalism, but there was this weird thing of like you know, discipline and living a life. So like theology and physical fitness were sort of inseparable.
Right, yeah.
Overall life of discipline and health and sort of being an upstanding man of God. And then the grace message came in, and then it was the people that were getting into the grace message that got involved in a little bit of a scandal involving pastors' wives and pastors.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of scandals in the church. And I think that was kind of my point that I was making with that, you know, to hang it on some kind of teaching. So I mentioned my friend Jonathan Welton. Again, I'm not like buddy with him, but I mean, we were affiliated with each other, you know, to some degree. And I'm not going to throw out, like, he's a preterist, right? He really pushed the partial preterist position of eschatology. I think he wrote the book Raptureless, and he gave it away for free, at least like his early draft, he gave it away for free. The theology is sound, right? What he presented and stuff like that has been, you know, it's solid. So, all right, he's been found wanting in this particular area. Now, I'm not going to just go and say, well, you know, I've got to now abandon my belief in preterism because he's gone and done this nonsense. But
Well,
that's
But how many people will do that? You know,
that was exactly my point.
Yeah.
That was what I was getting to, is that people are this Puritan thinking, almost like the SJWs we deal with today. Like, something, this person may have owned a slave or whatever. We got to wipe
it's
them from
evangelical
history.
cancel culture, right?
Correct. Why? Because we're all afraid of going to hell, and we actually believe our doctrine is going to save us rather than Christ. That's really what it is.
Yeah. Interesting. We got Tom Bombadil in the chat saying Joseph Prince married his wife as a virgin.
Yeah, he did.
No, she was a virgin or he was a virgin?
He was a virgin.
Okay, I was about to say.
I don't know if his wife was. I don't know. We had a chance to go to his church when we were in Singapore, and some of our team did go to Joseph Prince Church.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you were with because I didn't. I
had the awesome opportunity of going to the Chinese church to help out one of our friends. Not that I wouldn't want to, but in the now looking back, it was kind of like, I didn't at least get the chance to say, like, I went to Joseph Prince's church. Like, it was,
Me either.
Yeah. There's,
I can't even remember what church I went to.
Not that we would, want to like condone that per se, but you're almost kind of there's a bit of like, celebrity to it. Like, I didn't get, like, it's like if Billy Graham came to town and I didn't at least go to, like, drive by and look.
Yeah. But yeah, getting back on point here. So Corey, you were there talking with your family, and you offered an idea as to why this happens. Do you want to maybe expound a little bit on that, and we could see where that takes us?
I guess.
I mean, you had a 2-hour conversation. Let's get it down to like 10 minutes.
Oh, good luck. I'm just like to say good luck, everyone. We'll see where this goes. But to me, I'm, as we talked about before, I'm a pretty relatively anarchist guy. I don't really believe in authoritarian governments or really authoritarian anything. And to me, the root issue is that humans aren't really made for like having that much power and influence, right? I don't know if we talked about it on this podcast or maybe a different one, but if we talked about Dunbar's number, or the monkey sphere is the layman's term for it.
That's like the groups of 50 or something like that, or groups of 100.
Dunbar's number is like 150.
Yeah, give or take. And and that's how many people you can like empathize with as a human at any given moment, right? So if you're in a group of 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, those will turn to numbers and not people, right? Our dumb brains, like, we can't fathom that many people. Our human brain's a lot dumber than we think we are, right?
Well, we can fathom it if we cease to see those people as people.
Correct.
Exactly. And so, to me, like, the only way we're really getting those kind of, like, if you're looking at, old school, hunter-gatherer, tribalism stuff, most villages were like 100 to 200 people, right? Yes. So you can empathize with every single person in your troop, right? You can, all of your neighbors and your family and their kids and the tribe leaders and elders or whatever they had, right? You can empathize with everyone and make decisions that way. But once you don't, you're in uncharted territory, right? Yeah. And it's been this way for thousands of years, right? I'm not saying this is a right now problem. Like medieval kings, a king over like even like a town of 1,000, like most kings, notoriously are pretty corrupt. It's hard to find good kings. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think all of that all comes from like the act of being a king and the act of having any kind of that leadership and influence over a large number of people is not in the human repertoire, right? Yeah. I think it's always going to go to shit, no matter who you are, how good your ideals originally were, right? And I think we get to those areas because we have all of these huge institutions, which are essentially imaginary friends. And I can explain that more if we need to. But like the fact that we give legal and political and financial power to institutions and then have people in charge of those institutions, that is way out of the ballpark for any actual human to deal with, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to start looking at people as numbers, and you're going to have immense, crazy amounts of pressure and stress that the human isn't made for, and it's going to come out, right? And so to me, when you're in one of these big influential positions, it's only a matter of time before you fuck up and you're on the news, right? And everyone hates you.
Agreed. Yeah, I would put it to, for a lot of people, I said, look, there is no, I think I said this on the show, and Bobby, our friend Bobby, disagreed with me. There is no perfect institution, and there is no perfect gathering. And I think that's by design, because God understands our nature, that if there was such a thing as a perfect church, we'd just worship the church, right? We will just ignore God and, just focus on that. So every institution is going to have built-in flaws, as you're rightly saying. And especially the structures that we have now are completely alien to what the early church was dealing with. Again, early church, early Jewish and Gentile converts and stuff like that, there was the one temple in Jerusalem until the year 70 AD, right? Before that, they were meeting in homes, and people knew each other, and they were moving from house to house, if the case might be. And, they met at a table, they'd have a meal, the love feast, the agape feast, as they used to call it. And we've moved so far away from that you're quite right. In that sense, nobody knows. At that point, it's just numbers, it's concepts that we can't even really connect to. And I remember hearing there was, I can't remember the pastor's name, who it was. I think there was a Chinese guy that did this recently as well. I can't remember his name either. But I remember one of these guys standing up in front of the pulpit, looking out over however many thousand people. And he stood there and basically said he felt so alone. He's over this entire church. He's looking over this congregation, and he'd never felt more alone and isolated in his life. And he made some speech about, the family of God. Then he walked off the pulpit, walked out the church, and never came back. And he was like, that was the leader. He's like, fuck off. And that tends to be a thing. There's another guy who did that recently as well. Some Asian guy. He was very big with the evangelicals for a while. Can't remember his name, but he had a multi-something, million church or whatever. And he just got rid of everything. He just downsized it, and he did doing these home groups and these small studies. I think he still does some streaming and stuff. But I think that is the way we're supposed to do it. I think we are supposed to be in the home church. I think I'm very excited about the home church movement that's kind of coming up right now, or what's called the organic church movement, which some of that has no leadership at all. And they meet in a house, and they come together and they pray, they read the Bible. There's no particular leadership or anything like that. If somebody feels inspired, they share something and all this kind of stuff. It looks very different. Like, we think we know what the gift of tongues is, because if you go into like a Pentecostal church, you'd hear them, rambling off. These gifts sound very different in these kind of organic settings. Like a pet peeve of mine is the gift of prophecy, and I believe prophecy exists. But it is the most irritating thing for me to hear somebody prophesy, and it's all of this, you're chosen by God, and you're going to do great things for God, and, you're a man of God, and it's just generic bullshit that anybody could say. But I've been in these places, and these people are so precise. Like, on Thursday at 9 a.m., this lady is going to walk into your business, and she's going to do this, that, and the other. You are supposed to say this, that, and the other. Like, specific prophecies, not the showmanship nonsense that you tend to see. And I think a lot of that, the gifts have been diluted into this culture that it's no longer even recognizable. It's more flakery than anything else. But I think that's the way we're going. I think that's part of the solution. Well, what say you guys?
The 5 flake ministry.
To me, like, especially looking at modern churches now, like it's like half business, half Hollywood rock concert, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
that's it. Francis Chan is the guy's name.
He's downsized, right?
Yeah, he was one of them. The first one was somebody else, but Francis Chan did that recently.
Yeah, I know. Also, John Piper. He's a hardcore Calvinist, but he's also one of the pastors I really respect, and I think he's over in the Twin Cities too. But he ended up just quitting his 25 year mega church pastor ministry just to write blog posts and books and occasionally do speaking events. He just said, it's too much. to try to do all of this and be the pastor and have all this influence and stuff. So he just quit his pastor job and now just went to, writing and just being a general character. Right. And so I think that's really interesting too.
Where would you guys say, and this is kind of a little bit of a side topic, but I think it relates, is where do you guys think was the beginning of sort of the, there's definitely good things that happened in church history the entire time since the time of Christ, but where would you say was like a pivotal point, like the first time the church was going to see like a major decline?
In terms of membership, or
no, not membership, in terms of ceasing to be what Christ intended, or starting to diverge away from what Christ intended. The first
probably about 35 AD, probably
like just after he died. That's a good question, and that would be, that is the great theological debate between the branches of the church, right? The Catholics, the Orthodox.
Where did it all go wrong?
Yeah, where did it all go wrong?
You have to look sadly out a window while it's raining.
I would say it's somewhere around when Constantine became a Christian.
Is that about 300, 200?
Yes, 325 around that time.
So once he became a Christian, it became a nationalized, religion. That's sort of the beginning of the institution of church.
Possibly. Because remember the church did have the councils even before it became part of the political system. They did meet, but every jurisdiction kind of was their own thing. So Constantinople was kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah. It was like a larger, like a more of an extension of like kind of just when Paul would write to the churches individually. Like there was a network of churches forming in the early church. That's pretty biblically just recognized. I'm saying like after that, once, because the whole thing that I've like I went to an event, kind of like one of these big Christian youth events. I got to see the what's that guy? The pastor with no arms and no legs. Have you guys seen that?
I think I know who you're talking about, but I can't think.
Yeah, he's this like very popular like pastor that goes around and speaks, and he literally has no.
Well, gets carried around and speaks, but
he doesn't walk around.
He's found.
You're going to hell, Corey.
Thank you.
He can walk on his torso. Very little though. Yeah, Tom Bombadil's trying to figure that out. But basically,
he's a pastor or he's an inspirational speaker?
Probably both.
Okay.
Yeah, now you're just typing in the pastor with no arms and no legs.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Okay. With the Nick Vujicki, what is that?
Yeah, something.
He's a pastor. I didn't know he was a pastor. I thought he was just an inspirational guy.
Yeah. So, I went to an event where he was speaking, fun enough, as many other pastors were there. But one of the things was they gave a presentation at the beginning, like a video that was talking about like, Christians can change the world. And one of the big things was like they were showing like what happened after Christ. So after Christ ascended, so this happened, that happened, the church formed, and they said, and through the efforts of the early Christians by 300 something AD, Constantine became, got saved, and then the church became, the national religion. I was like, and then many people are kind of thinking, he changed the nation. And I'm just sitting here like now looking back on that, like, no, the whole church fell, went to shit after that. What I'm getting at with that is that's kind of becomes one of the first, I think, points of diverging where the church ceased to become a thing about people and a thing about being real. Like one of the major points where it's turning into the institution, which could further that sort of duplicitous side of being in leadership. Because once Constantine makes it the religion into a national thing, now it becomes institutionalized. Now this is the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church and all that. The church starts turning into more of men in power. rather than people in each other's lives.
Yeah, and I'd also say it becomes trendy, right?
Exactly. That's
that
the,
you're
that's the
allowed
thing.
to pick and choose and not have to go hide in a foxhole because someone might kill you, right?
Right. And then that's sort of the beginning of this more like, people would kind of point out like this Greco-Roman attitude within Christianity that wasn't at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking on this quite a bit, and I think there's some truth to what you're saying, but I also think the problem actually goes back even further than that. I think because they've lost.
It was Paul's fault.
Yeah, I'm looking
How
at the
dare they?
I'm looking at the Council of Jerusalem, and it's. I think when the church kind of broke with Jerusalem, when Jerusalem kind of no longer was in communication after 70 AD, and the Jewish influence of the scriptures was lost, and it was lost to the Greco-Roman interpretation, I think that was probably the fundamental flaw.
Right.
Because the scriptures were written to Jews. A lot of it has a lot of Jewish influence, as you guys know I keep harping on about. But once Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, and the Jews were scattered and stuff like that, the remaining civilizations kind of took it upon themselves without that Jewish history, without that Jewish rooting. Mm-hmm. And that's when we start to see a lot of the problems. And I agree, once it became political, it's a two-edged sword. It overcame the empire, so it got to spread. People no longer had to be fair and all that good stuff. Yeah, and I think all of that's positive. But I agree, that's when we start getting into the second estate. So you have the kings, queens, emperors, whatever as the first estate, and then you have the bishops and the clergy and stuff like that as the second estate, and you got these structures of power. And this would be to Corey's point about, I don't think that's natural. I don't think the church was ever meant to be in those types of structures.
Right.
Even the addition of the Pope, that was a demand of the empire. The empire wanted one person to deal with the entire church. So the politics of the region created the institution of the Pope. Everybody's like, oh yeah, well, the succession of popes that go back to Peter. Well, Peter was only the bishop in Jerusalem, right? Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. The Gentiles never reported to Peter. So that's the whole break.
Well, and that's the thing. That's what I'm getting at. It. I think even among those councils that were forming, they were still like councils that, early church leadership was very organic in nature. Yes. And they weren't sitting around like, here's how we're going to decide on this interpretation of scripture per se. They would have discussions, but there wasn't sort of any like governing body, as it was more so just a more organized form of discussion, if anything.
Correct. And that's why I look at the Council of Jerusalem as recorded in the book of Acts, right? So the question then was, do we need to circumcise the Gentiles and put them under the law? And Peter was the one who stood up and said, brethren, why are we going to put the burden on them when we as Jews can't even keep the law? Like, what are we going to give it to them for if we can't even do it? And they basically came up with a handful of rules. And then it goes on to say that these things seemed good to the Holy Spirit. But the problem is we cannot say that about pretty much anything else in history. We hope every other council meeting was approved of by the Holy Spirit, but we don't know that.
Right. So that's kind of what I was getting at, was the overall the early beginnings of the church. Like, I think one of the major, like I said, points of like, this was the beginning, not beginning of the end. Like, I think, obviously I believe like the Holy Spirit definitely still moves through the church in a different way today, through people individually, whether through churches, through groups and such. But sort of one of the major points was, was it just like, was Constantine, like, was it bad that Constantine became a Christian? No. But by essentially, the head of state to become a Christian, it's interesting how that became like the sort of the beginning of the institution of, the Christian religion. Once the Greco-Roman influences came in, they started forming the Roman Catholic Church. And then the entire religion was sort of just hijacked by a different culture that kind of just saw it as a means of that turned it into a whole system of control, rather than at least eventually turned into that, because now that leads to the growth of the Catholic Church. And what does the Catholic Church become? One of the most powerful entities in the old world.
I mean, I'd argue it's still pretty powerful today.
Exactly, but that's the thing. Like, it was. I mean, there was a time when the Pope could tell a king what to do. The one man who could order kings, because if kings didn't agree, they just went to war, or just left each other alone. But then the Pope could step in and say, "No, you're doing this." If the Pope's coming, like, the Pope was above the kings, and.
No, I wouldn't say the Pope was above the kings, but they definitely wanted the Pope's blessing in the ancient world. And I mean, there's a whole history of because the French had a Pope. It's a very, very convoluted.
But this is the thing, is that they actually had one or many leaders that did not naturally sort of come about as a result of the church as it was supposed to be. It became a whole structure of choosing individuals to lead and be fallible and cause, maintain the church as more of a structure of power rather than a structure of the church. Yeah,
I mean,
without getting too far into that.
I don't want to get too much into the history of the whole thing. I completely agree that once the church became a political institution, we entered into what is now called the Dark Ages, right? So when politics and religion mix, definitely had its problems. And this is why I don't blame the Protestant reformers for what they did, right? So Martin Luther was dealing with, we have to be honest, the Catholic Church at that point was a very corrupt institution with indulgences. Mm-hmm. They were setting up parishes in places where people didn't even speak the language, right? All the masses were in Latin. You had to be of the elite class speaking Latin to really participate in the Catholic Church back in, around the time of the Reformation. So I agree. And this is why throughout church history, it's always been, okay, there was the history of the church traditions and there was the advent of scripture. But at that point in time, I understand why the reformers did what they did, because they looked at the church and basically said, this is not great. And they basically went and they created the sola scriptura. Well, Calvin came up with sola scriptura. So I don't knock them for that. But we forget there is an entirely different branch of the church that did not have a reformation, which was the Orthodox Church, right? They did not have a break.
But this is, just to kind of walk it back around. Where church does more to sort of reinforce this duplicitous nature of people, to then become more of a structure that is very much more prone to what we kind of see today. This cancel culture, how men are so. Sort of the power trip of being a minister kind of turns you.
So, we're discussing solutions at this point. We're looking at
definitely
what is the structure that doesn't encourage this type of behavior. Is that what you're saying? What you're asking?
Yeah. I think just the way church structure in general has been today across, because of all these denominations coming from, coming from this, you can't, if you look back, like, as I'm saying, the beginning of the end, I almost with Constantine, maybe even before that, as you were saying, the church ceased to be sort of family and became structures and hierarchies.
All right. So let's do that as the topic. Corey, you with us?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
All right. So Corey, what as the anarchist of the group, if you were pastor anarchist CONK,
how would that exist?
Which I am.
Right, yeah, basically. If you were to set up an institution, like if you were to set up a church, let's not use institution, but as a church, what would that look like in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it would definitely go down the rabbit hole of trying to do organic numbers, as in, do it as they are, and if you start getting really big and start getting successful, like kind of like we're talking about Ted Haggard, instead of you just trying to run the whole thing over and over again, make a sister church, right? have someone else, split them up, go to a different person's house. You know what I mean? Just kind of like how you would set up Bible studies in church today, because I think really at the end of the day, that's kind of what church is. Like the whole rock band theatrics and smoke screens and cool light shows, singing pop culture, Christian songs, followed by a 20-minute feel-good sermon, right? That's kind of what church has turned into for thousands of people. It's a rock show and a feel-good message, right? I think really church should just be people getting together, doing the communion and the fellowship, getting to know each other, become, a genuine community of neighbors, right? And if you feel like it's going well and it's growing and everybody's learning a lot, like split it up, right?
Right.
And what would you say would happen? You split the church, so there's the Church of CONK and the Church of CONK 2.
I wouldn't even call it that. Because I'm with Paul, I'm with Cephas, I'm with Apollo. No, we're all with Christ.
Okay. So
boom.
It would be the Church of CONK's basement versus the Church of CONK's attic.
Yeah.
Right, because you got to do geography, right?
We'll do the Church of Kansas City,
right.
CONK's house. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So you got the church, exactly. So the two churches are in disagreement now. Let's say there's a disagreement between the two churches, the two gatherings. What then?
Who cares? That's not my problem.
May the best theology win.
Or my monkeys, right? They got their own problems too.
I mean, the ideal would probably, if you wanted to kind of utilize the principle of Dunbar's number, you could just once you reach Dunbar's number, you split in half.
Yeah, but then that introduces a rule. I would say as soon as it becomes unwieldy for you, right? Like a Chipotle burrito just becomes unwieldy. It's kind of spilling everywhere.
I mean, it's not like you sit there and try to make a rule, but you're definitely keeping track of things that once you're kind of reaching a certain number of people that are regularly attending, you kind of start to, you can plan out, it's like it's a planned secession sort of thing. Like you kind of just break it up to make sure that things don't get out of hand with, that you won't get too powerful, so to speak.
Unlimited power.
Exactly. So,
I'm sorry, your Bible study is hit to 201. You now have lightning hands until you split. Lightning hands.
But you just kind of start having you could definitely figure things out to say okay, what's better for these people to once you're reaching a certain point, you can kind of figure, okay, well, there's a good chunk of this group that are closer to this guy, and I trust him. He's, I trust him to be able to lead a group of people. So then you just have this talk with him and say, away with you, or whatever,
Be gone, thought.
you split it up, and then then you kind of it's someone that you trust enough to kind of go off and do that. And then maybe I
think that'll happen over time anyway, right? Somebody's eventually going to be both educated and charismatic. Even in a group of 150 and you still can empathize with anyone, there's still going to be cliques, right? Where you relate to someone more than someone else.
But you're able to kind of, but those are a little more manageable where you can kind of split it up and people can kind of go on their own. But then this, but people don't have that level of I don't know if it's discipline, but people don't think in those terms. They just kind of we're starting to get 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000 people a week. The offerings are coming in. I'm getting, me, the senior pastor, is getting a larger and larger sum of money paid to me. Now I can do this as a job.
Yeah. Which sounds like a nail in a coffin, but to me,
yeah, exactly. That's where the nails start coming in, and now we're gonna hire a youth pastor. Now we're gonna hire a marriage, pastoral care pastor.
I would hopefully, spread it out before then.
But this is what happens though. It's like they instead of splitting or trying to decentralize the sort of the booming church that they're forming, they further centralize it. What is it? Oh yeah.
But they happen. That's just human nature. It's like trying to have cats.
Clicks within a small enough group is one thing, but when you sort of now you have like sort of this fragmentation within such a large church that there's no real community within the church.
Yeah, which is exactly what I think is the problem.
Because you go to these large churches and they're like, oh, we don't want you to just come to the big service and feel lonely as hell. Because they understand that. And they're like, we want you to join our singles group. Our 20s, our 20s singles group, our 30s singles group, our men's group, our women's group, our multiple levels of kids ministry, like every grade level has their own building, kind of. You get these large churches that get to the point where they're just segregating, pardon the word, but segregating further and further by group to kind of like try to create. And then like, for me going to this large church I used to go to here in Minnesota, it was, there was the main sanctuary. That was where the adults went. But then within that, they had the multiple groups. And then they would split up to middle school, then the high school ministry. But then within those ministries, you had even small groups. So like there was a group of like 6 or 7 of us who were led by a youth leader. And then it was just like, and then some of those groups would get together and have an event at one of the youth leaders' houses. It was just further and further breaking up. And then we all grew up, and then we were in the college ministry.
All right, we have Heather on here. I think she.
All right. Before Heather goes,
go quickly.
I do want to throw out a question, and Heather can answer as well. But here's my second half of this, where honestly, is it that bad? Like, can Falwell still be a pastor and allegedly like that? Could Ted Haggard?
That's a good question.
Yeah, could Ted Haggard do meth and have male escorts and still be a good pastor? Like
That's
going to the morality
question.
and the grace, right? Because this came up with my family yesterday, because one of the ones that personally happened to us is I was like the right-hand man. I was an intern at the time to a man, and it was a startup Assemblies of God church, and he was having an affair. I didn't know about it at the time, but honestly, he was a good guy, and the ministry did not suffer. He eventually stood down when it became public, but I mean, the church was still rolling and going, and I didn't think it was that big of a deal. So I don't know.
Good question.
And I would love Bobby to be here to talk about that.
That would have been a very good question for Bobby.
But honestly, I think he still could have done the pastorate and, choose, maybe they get divorced, maybe, he cuts off that or whatever. But honestly, does that really affect his ministry capability?
That's a good question. Heather, do you want to chime in on that? I don't know.
Oh, I so want to chime in on that.
Bring it on.
Here's the thing. Brooke is aware that I was an 80s kid, and we were members of the PTL club and were Heritage USA support. Like, we had lifetime memberships. We went through all that stuff. So I have some unresolved hostility toward Jerry Falwell Sr. that I'll probably have to work out later. Because when the whole thing fell down with Jim Baker, we loved Jim and Tammy Baker. It's like, I thought they were great. My sister and I watched their program every day. We were obsessed with it. And, we were young teens. And so when we would be there and we got the opportunity to be on the show live, like to be in the live audience, and we got to see them up close when they'd come around and say hello, we were like starstruck. I remember there was a parade that happened for the 4th of July through Heritage USA. And I remember Jerry Falwell, this was after the fall of Jim Baker, when Jerry Falwell was in Jim Baker's position in the parade as the Grand Master. And I remember like feeling like sick to my stomach.
Right.
And it was because I thought Jim Baker was great and I didn't understand. But also in my youth, previous to that, when I was very young, the pastor to my church, his wife and him split up, and she married one of the parishioners.
Right.
Then the next pastor after that had an affair with the church secretary and impregnated her. He was married and had 2 children. So my whole thing is practice what you preach. If you are doing wild stuff, then don't go around condemning it.
Yeah.
Don't make a big deal. You know, like, don't be
a hypocrite.
Don't be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest problem with all of this, aside from the fact that my hair never looks good when I'm on camera. And it really, really upsets me.
Maybe you just need a software upgrade, you know. They might have a hair
that's
add-on.
what we'll say. That's what we'll say, because I'm still a bot in your mind. I know. But would a bot have such bad hair? No.
You never know.
So, you know, it's just this, you know, it's just them going around and saying things that are just completely opposite of what they do. And that do as I say, but not as I do aspect of things just sticks in my craw, and I'm sick of it. And when the whole thing came up with Jerry Falwell Jr., honest to God, I had such feelings about the old stuff from when I was younger coming back up. And it's like, you rat bastard, how dare you?
Exactly.
I am certainly not perfect, but I am not going around professing to be either.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
that's what really gets to me. And I'm sorry that I'm so emotional about it, but
No,
I mean,
it's
this
good.
is really, really old stuff for me. Really old stuff. And, you know, when you're mentioning a bunch of pastors who've had recent things, and I honestly have no idea who they are. You're talking about things, I go back to the re-listen and I'm pausing and I'm looking stuff up so I know like what's going on, because I don't, you know, pay as much attention because I've removed myself so far from that.
Mhm.
And when it comes to the church splitting, I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time.
No, go for
No,
it.
it's fine. It's
When
fine.
when the church when a church gets too big and they're running out of room, I remember when I met my husband, we were members of, well, he was a member, I just attended the church. And when we started dating, he's 21 years older than me. But I looked a lot younger than I was. So it's like, you know, I was like 27 or 20, I can't remember. Anyway, I was in my late 20s, and women in the church started like making comments to me about what I was wearing.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And making as though I was being inappropriate. And I mean, I have to tell you, I'm a very conservative dresser. I cover a lot. And as age goes on, you know, the hemlines go down. You know, they really were pushy with that, but it was that same group that tried to control things that also tried to get my husband, when they noticed he and I were talking, they tried to get him to start a singles group that they wanted him to moderate. And he didn't have the time. He's so busy. He was so busy with his work then. He's so busy with his work now. I mean, it's just, he didn't have time for that. And he had done a lot of other community service things as well. And then that same clique of people, when it came to the church being overcrowded, they were like, absolutely not. We're not going to split into, because they wanted to split into two separate time slots, like have an earlier morning service and then one that went after the Sunday school. And they just were balking about it and talking about getting a new building and, you know, let's do this and let's do that, you know, because expansion is always good. You know, it's like mass consumerism 101. And don't get me wrong, big fan of capitalism, but I just like, I just didn't understand what the big deal is. And part of the big deal was they would have lost control.
Right.
And they couldn't handle that. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents on it. But I really get a lot out of everything you guys were saying today. I can't wait for the re-listen because I'll be looking stuff up. Because Amos was, as usual, talking about things that I don't know. And heaven forbid if Tom comes on after me, I'll have no idea half of what he's saying. So it'll be, instead of an unpacking session, it will be a research session. Oh, and by the way, as I promised, I am calling from my glorious new kitchen.
New place.
Look at that.
Which is fabulous.
I was going to say, Heather, it weirds me out a bit because my mom in Seattle has the exact same color cabinets and like microwave oven. And I'm like, what are you doing at my mom's house?
Well, this is a new.
Please don't be her friend. Please don't be her friend.
Well, your mom and I are probably close to the same age. Is she pushing 50?
I think she's 51, 52 in that ballpark.
She's
Close.
been,
I lost
been
track.
in the
I
same
don't even know how old I
generation.
am.
I figure I'm like your den mother coming in here, you know, hovering around,
We'll
throwing
call
in
it
my little comments.
my robot aunt.
Your robot aunt. That's it. I'm an excellent aunt. I'm an excellent aunt. All right, guys. Thanks so much for letting me in. And what a great topic. I really enjoy this program. I look forward to it every single Sunday. It's such a treat. Thank
Great
you.
to hear.
Thanks for coming on, Heather.
But yeah, what you're talking about with the hypocrisy and practice what you preach, that's a big deal, right? And so, like, you know, with the Ted Haggard, he was preaching anti-gay marriage politically, but he was doing some not so political.
he was. I mean, and
gay marriage on the side, right?
I just to say before Tom gets into it, this is what happens when you hang your hat on the morality totem. Mm-hmm. There, it's in the narrative of the garden. There are 2 trees. There's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. And everybody is sucking down hard on the knowledge of good and evil, and they think if they suck harder, they'll get better.
But really, you die.
But yeah, exactly. The end result of that is death. If all you get from that is do good and don't do bad, and you scream at people to do good and not do bad, you're sucking down the wrong tree and you're gonna die. It's that simple.
So we need a McAfee pastor.
We need to teach people to live from the Christ in them. That would, if I'm setting up the church, that's it. Tom, my man, how are you doing, man? Everything going good? How's the coffee, bro?
It's good. I have coffee right here in a red cup.
Red Solo cup.
Right.
That's very churchy.
Coffee.
Is it an Irish coffee?
9
What's
parts
on your mind,
Baileys to 1 part coffee. Yeah.
I feel kind of
bro?
right now.
Yeah.
All right. So I had a question for Amos, because I know.
Good.
I know one.
Stick it to him.
No. This isn't like a hard question. I know one teacher that CONK likes is John Piper. I know Brook likes John Crowder.
Yes.
Right. So who's someone that you like mainstream? Is there anyone left that you like in the mainstream, Amos?
Like, what do you mean?
You're allowed to pick CONK. That's on the table. I'm just saying.
I never fully like discounted anyone and like separated anyone from theology. Like Joseph Prince has good stuff. Crowder has good stuff. But I mean, I've been so out of touch with just what is going on in the church as a whole. I mean, even people that I used to work with, I look up to in some of the theology that they've talked about, even though I haven't listened to them in literally years. It's unlike a lot of, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are, and it's just human nature. You tend to watch people, and it's kind of an all or nothing for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have this, take in the meat and spit out the bones attitude. So even though it would take me quite a while, and I probably would, want to, no offense to anyone that might be having such feelings, but I'd probably kill myself before trying to find the meat within like, Westboro Baptist Church's message. There's probably something in there if I dig deep enough, but I'd probably kill myself before then.
Or you'd probably go nuts trying to find it.
Yeah. But it's like, so I think everyone has something to offer. But then I think equally just as much like someone like Westboro Baptist Church would have a lot more not to offer than to offer. To be beneficial to people.
It'd be a deep, deep dig that's probably not worth the effort.
It's not worth the squeeze.
Exactly. So that's what I was kind of getting at is like, I mean, there's a lot of people that like, I definitely like have lost. And that's the thing is I could lose a sense of like respect or sort of, if you want to call it fandom or just sort of the wonder, the feeling of like, looking up to someone with a lot of preachers, both people that I agree with a lot or maybe not a lot on, but when it comes down to it, there's, if the theology is sound, it's sound. There's some really crazy stuff that even some of the early church fathers got involved in that, you can't really, what was it? Using Origin, right?
Yeah. Origin is pretty far out there.
Yeah. Far out.
Didn't he do some stuff to his body or something?
I think he castrated himself.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Gnosticism.
Yeah.
but his theology was pretty sound. He had some pretty solid
food.
Martin Luther whipped the shit out of himself.
Yeah,
he beat the crap out of himself with a
King
whip.
Dominic did too.
Yeah.
The guy who received the rosary, he literally beat himself into like this religious experience where he received the rosary.
Huh.
But that's kind of Catholic.
That's so Catholic.
Martin Luther tended to be a really big anti-Semite when he was drunk.
Yeah, he was.
So I mean, is it saying, I'm just, praise be to God for the anti-Semite, Reformation guy? No, it's just more so like the theology and the contribution that a lot of these people make. I think is more important than kind of the downfalls that they've had in their own lives. Like you definitely want to keep, like, it's a good reminder to kind of look at that and say, oh, okay,
separate the man from the message kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a further repeating message of nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
I
mean,
more so, nobody's going to live a perfect life
right
outwardly. Like we can talk about being made perfect in Christ all day long, and that's true, but we're
still growing into that.
Yeah. The men who get these like this such profound life-changing message is still, doing, high out of his mind, hookers, drugs, alcohol. Probably had some not so savory views.
You talking about me?
Exactly.
Someone read my diary.
How'd you know?
And I mean,
Thursday.
One of the crazy stories of like Todd White was how he was snorting so much coke that he had a religious experience, or there was another one that he couldn't get high because
singer from Korn.
Yeah.
Both of them had similar stories,
Yeah.
though. That's the thing. Like, there's always some like crazy thing where like the guys will have these guys who will have like some of the most like profound revelation as they're as they're becoming a Christian because they got really high, really drunk. Or even Jimmy Swaggart would talk about when he was with the prostitutes, he would cry out to God as she was in the bathroom, like getting ready to go, service him. And it's like, it's hard to believe that you can really just, the reality is, God is closer probably in those moments for some people than like, you that's out there full of the Spirit preaching to thousands of people. Yeah,
I don't know. Have either of you guys, any of you guys, have you all heard of a guy on YouTube called Bobby's Perspective? Amos, maybe you've heard of it. Corey, have you heard of Bobby's Perspective?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so he's a Greek gentleman who's really big on mushrooms, right? He's like an evangelist for mushrooms and stuff. And
so mushrooms perspective.
Yeah. Basically, it's his. And to be fair, he back in the day he was a drug dealer. Living the party life, girls, all this kind of. And he got tremendously sick, and then he literally healed himself of incurable diseases, tripping out on mushrooms. So it's a fantastic story.
Yes.
Right. But beyond that, more recently, actually, on one of his ridiculous mushroom trips, he encounters Jesus. And Jesus basically shows him a map of the world of the various religions and stuff like that, and saying, and gave him this whole kind of evangelical preach. And he came out of it and then joined the Greek Orthodox Church. And he fully attributes his conversion to a ridiculous mushroom trip. That's on YouTube. You can check it up. He's a really cool guy. He's a bit of a carnivore, bodybuilder kind of guy. Not much of a theologian, but I'm not going to knock it. God could use anything. So like we were talking earlier about how Constantine came into the... God uses everything, even the bad.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing to become a Christian. It's just...
Or a Catholic, or whatever your faith is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
People got to lay off Roosh then, because he took mushrooms.
Did he?
Yeah, I was going to bring up Roosh. That's funny.
I don't know, man.
He's Orthodox now as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
I don't think liking butts are gay, though.
Yeah, he's not really...
Oh my God.
It's like he went to the religion that a lot of us were like raised on, and like super strict.
Yeah, because we'll talk about like the God pill as like a bad thing almost. Like, what is it? They're calling it the white pill and all this stuff. Like, a lot of these guys who are in like sort of the red pill and such that get a little bit of Jesus in them, but kind of the wrong part of, not even the wrong part of Jesus, just they decide to work with the wrong part of it, so they kind of turn into sort of like kind of try to attribute morality to human nature.
Yeah, there's a guy that brought up God in the Hater episode yesterday of Rule Zero. Did you guys see that? Everybody instantly cringed, and then like he got kicked off like 30 seconds later. Because it's the whole, to me, the God pill. The problem with the God pill is that it's about saving the West, and that you need God in your life to save society. Like, fuck society. Who cares? That's how I feel.
But I mean, if your goal is to save society, yeah, I understand implementing religion. If I was a politician, I would promote religion in my society as well.
Yeah.
Conk, what do you think of my question to Rollo when he? So I asked Rollo if he were to die in the stand before God, like would God rebuke him and send him to hell for leading men into fornication, or what would Rollo say? Like, would Jesus say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant"? And Rollo was like, God would rebuke me for not finishing the fourth book.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
I don't think, like, some people, I think a lot of people, like myself, would think Rollo's going to hell, but from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I think if anything, he believes he's doing God's work.
Yeah. Maybe he is. Maybe his first three books is his calling, and that's why he's struggling with the fourth one, because he's really not supposed to write it. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, there's I can't remember which epistle it's in, but Paul was talking about that. I think the church members were mad at a guy because he was preaching the gospel, but he was doing it with vain or with
Yeah,
glory
for
involved and
selfish
stuff.
glory.
Yeah, and Paul's like, who cares?
Yeah, some preach for vanity, some preach for the love of God. As long as the gospel gets preached, I don't give a shit. That's basically Paul's attitude.
Yeah, and I think that kind of applies here. The fact that, like, even though he's not objectively saying, like, all of the basic gospel message, I think he's still out there trying to put out actual truths to help people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's almost like asking that same question to, like, an algebra teacher, right? Like, algebra is something good and useful to use, but I mean, it's not necessarily the gospel, right? So it'd be, stop teaching algebra and start talking more about the gospel. But we kind of need algebra, but we gotta, right?
Yeah.
Some people would say quit algebra. A lot of people I grew up around would say quit the algebra and go preach on the corner.
Yeah, well, they're dumb. Well,
I got that.
They were dumb.
But what if But what if that algebra teacher did more coke than you've ever seen before?
Awesome. Then he's invited to my birthday party.
Yeah.
As long as he doesn't come with his hands swinging. Oh, fantastic. Tom, any further questions, man, or we'll pick it up next week?
Yeah, I just want to say I think I've come to like I've been bouncing around from different camps. I feel like I've come to like the Mere Christianity experience. If y'all read that book, where it's like he talks about the different rooms in the mansion.
Yeah.
And that, we all pick different rooms like Catholic, Protestant, Greek Orthodox, and various denominations. But like at the end of the day, like we all end up being the ones that are serious about the faith all end up being very close to one another.
I agree. I mean, that's my story as well. I don't think there's any one camp that has all of my beliefs. I believe they're inspired. I believe God has led me to this place. But I can't find one place that fits all of that. I'm pulling from a lot of different streams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good job, man.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, good to have you on, man. I think we're going to wrap it up there, man, guys. So, Tom, we'll see you around, man.
See you next week.
Take care, bro. So, gentlemen, final thoughts. Well, Corey, just to answer your question, I would go with basically what Amos was saying. As I said before, my friend Jonathan Welton, he got caught up in all this kind of stuff. But I'm not going to throw his teachings out. The teachings were very solid. And even the pastor in Trinidad who's on wife number 5, maybe 6 by now, the work still stands. The stuff that he did outside of his personal struggles and stuff like that still stands. If nobody had known the things that was going on, would it have made a difference? I wish the church was honest and open and safe enough that you can let people know the worst things about you. And that doesn't have to be the standard by which you're judged.
I actually will just quickly add, I know we're going a little over on time, but actually, you remember Brook at that conference we spoke at last?
Yes.
I did that.
Yes, I do.
It did not go well. I mean, I shouldn't say this. It went well for the people. It did not go well with the leadership.
Yes, I agree.
We'll
save that story for another time.
Yeah. I was going to say real quick for my final thought.
Final thoughts.
But the reason I was bringing up, like, is it that big of a deal if my pastor friend I worked for had a affair, was that during that same time there was a second scandal happening at a different church. So I worked at this church, like, as my normal job, and then in the summers they don't have their internship program, so I would intern with this church because it's like local to my family,
right?
And I got to know them all. But so both churches had scandals at the same time. The Summer Assemblies of God church plant had the affair where he was seeing another girl, like in another town, and was trying to keep it hidden on the down low kind of thing. But the other church was that they had the youth pastor diddle a 16-year-old boy.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. And I knew both of them. I worked there, right? I knew all of them very well. And they pushed it under the rug and sent him to gay rehab and didn't call the police.
And they swept it under the rug.
They swept it under the rug. And so they hid that. And then I see this other church where the guy is just having an affair with another adult woman just in another town, and they make it this huge deal, and he has to quit, and everyone's devastated. I'm like, this is so backwards and fucked up. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't give two shits about the affair. What the hell's going on with the freaking diddling youth pastor?
Yeah.
Like, why do we care so much about that part? So that's kind of where I was coming from, because both of those happened literally in the same year, 2011. So
Wow.
it was a while ago, but yeah, and nothing still ever came of it. I called the police and I got fired for it. That's a whole story for another time.
Yeah,
But-
definitely we could get it. And as it says, even in the scripture, the giftings of God are without repentance. So if you're gifted as a teacher, a pastor, an evangelist, or whatever, it's not dependent on your behavior. You can screw up and you still have the gift. And I wish the church was, focused on the life of Christ and people and their giftings and life in the spirit rather than this morality maze that we're in. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, I think that's a wrap. Next week, we are on the 10K Run podcast channel. Amos's channel.
Yes.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
So for all our listeners, all our viewers, thank you for being a part of the show. Fantastic discussion. We might have to do a part 2. I think there's a lot that we didn't even get into. But yeah, definitely an interesting show. If you had something to say, Amos, before
No, we're good. We're good.
We're good. So, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to join us next week. That will be 3 p.m. British Summer Time. That is what time is it in Minnesota?
What time?
What time do you start? Well, Conk, what's the time we start in your
9
neck of the woods? 9 o'clock. Amos is in Minnesota. Conk, what's the time in your area?
9 a.m. Missouri. We're
9 a.m. Missouri
parallel.
time.
Yeah.
So join us next week on the 10K ROM channel. All the links are below, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for watching, guys.